Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Drobo Broadcast Network. My name is Mario Blandini at Drobo, and today's topic is about virtualization, specifically how to protect your virtual environment. And getting things in the full benefit of virtualization can be possible, depending on how you put the architecture together. And to help talk about that topic today is special guest Rick Vanover, a guest expert from Veeam. How you doing today, Rick?
Hey, Mario. I'm doing great. Thanks again for having me back on the DBN.
Yeah, we're excited. We talk smaller organizations here, which makes the Drobo Broadcast Network a little unique. We're going to talk about how even smaller shops can get the full benefits of virtualization. As we go to the abstract slide, if you're backing up physical machines, you probably agree it's not fun, and it can be challenging. And if you're trying to back up your virtual machines using the same techniques, same architecture, likely you're running into several limiting factors that don't give you the full benefits. So this episode discusses the approaches and architectures for backing up that virtualized environment from a smaller IT perspective and gives you some tips on how you can reduce recovery time. I'm glad to have you back, Rick, on the broadcast because you bring a great set of expertise around how to make things better. And for a lot of smaller organizations, you don't get a lot of great advice. Talk a little bit about what Veeam does and some of your background around this particular topic area.
Sure. So, like many IT pros out there, virtualization's been central to my career. Actually, I started with Workstation 1.0 in the VMware realm, but, it's gone all over the place from there. But basically, virtualization keeps rearing its head back up. So, specifically for the smaller environment, virtualization is one of those technologies that has allowed smaller technology shops to actually get the full benefits that the larger shops get. And let's start with vSphere, right? A lot of APIs and frameworks and all that. They're really allowing some big time features to make their way to the small, medium business, and that's really where Veeam has done well as well. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Fantastic. Going to the next slide and talking about how VM backup works for SMBs. Really, it's about recovery. And I think one of the things that most organizations realize once they get their virtual machine infrastructure working the way they want to is that they no longer have to do maintenance off hours. They can do it during normal working hours. And in the event of needing to do a restoration, I think we have a microwave society these days, Rick, where people, they want it now. And that has a lot to do with the way you go to back up the systems, because recovering them quickly, it requires a very specific way to go ahead and do that. So in terms of getting fast recovery, what are some of the drivers behind that? It's simply because people want their VMs up as fast as possible.
Well, yeah, the expectations have increased, right? Virtualization in the category of disruptive technologies has done a lot of great things for us, but it's making the stakeholders, the business, and the applications really expect more from us. And that's everything from deployment management, speed, but also protection and recovery type of technology. So, to say, well, we might have it back up tomorrow is just not going to fly anymore. So with Veeam's interests, we've deployed some technology specifically built for virtualization that can bring things back from the dead in a matter of moments. It's good stuff.
And it's a different way of thinking, one of them being the freedom from application agents and the restrictions that come with that. I think that's probably something people need to think about in advance. They likely have a backup tool that they're using, and they can use it on a virtual machine, but that agentless part of it is important to keep in terms of the requirements there, partly because it makes it a lot easier and makes it more consistently repeatable. The fewer parts, the better. And naturally, it's got to be cost effective. We understand that. And we'll give you some tips and techniques on how you can build an architecture that's probably not as expensive as you might think. So we go on to our next slide. The basic architecture of what you're trying to do in a virtual machine backup environment, whether that's VMware or Hyper-V. And as of version 6, Veeam Backup and Recovery has fantastic support for Hyper-V machines as well. So regardless of what you might have out there, the servers, the network, and even a WAN in a lot of cases are likely already in place, so you don't have to put a lot of infrastructure out there. You do need some reliable storage to put your backups onto, and we'd recommend that you make that specifically a lower cost tier than what you're using for primary, because the advantage of using a solution like this is you can drive down cost. Your backup images don't have to be on the same category of storage that you have your primary applications running. And we'll talk a little bit later with Rick about how the whole spare tire mentality comes into it. There's a lot of people driving around without a spare these days. Heck, it'd be better to have a spare than have nothing at all. And I think where I'm going to want your advice here, Rick, is around the type of things that need to come in with the backup software. Now, things like WAN optimization, multi-hypervisor support, and doing things like quick migration, those sort of things really can help you out. From a requirements standpoint, what are the things that people want to look for in their software package to make sure they're getting the one that's going to give them the most long-term use?
Well, what it comes down to is it's really taking some of the design principles we've always used and applying that to this framework of virtualization that we have. So this figure illustrates it really well of separation, right? So we've represented multiple domains of failure. So the primary storage could fail, but that's okay. Our backups are on one of two different storage resources, and you could even go so far as to spread that to different makes and models of storage, meaning if you take a project to update the firmware on every storage controller and that knocks it out, well, if you keep your backups on that firmware, that new firmware, then you've knocked that out as well, right? So you kind of just have to layer in different means of protection, but you also have to do that in a way that brings you additional features like dedupe of your backups, which is a feature that Veeam offers, and many other products, but also, these optimizations, right, to send it off-site, right, which is, kind of an analogous replacement for tape.
Yep.
Something that moves this protection off-site. Again, another domain of failure, another design principle, but then we kind of backfill that with features, right? Multi-hypervisor support. So if you're going this way or if you're going that way, quick migration, which we'll talk about a little bit more, as well as network techniques such as the re-IP capability, which can accommodate different locations in a virtual environment. Basically, the takeaway is, line up the requirements, apply the features of your platform, and then design accordingly.
And for folks who may not have a second site, there are a lot of service providers out there that work with companies like Drobo and Veeam to offer you the ability to do your replicated copies offsite for backup. And that can replace tape. A lot of times just using your tape backup expenses today to fund a new project like this can more than pay for it, and you get such a tremendous increase in the level of service doing it in that way. And we'll talk a lot more about that in the broadcast. The takeaway, though, is you probably have most of what you need. You just need to pick up a couple of different parts. I love how you talked about the 3-2-1 strategy, Rick, which is if you want to keep something, you need 3 copies of it on 2 different storage media. One of those needs to be off-site. And that's just general best practices to make sure you don't lose valuable information. Let's dive a little bit more into the requirements. To me, Rick, accessibility is really important because a lot of the headaches, I know myself from having done backups as an IT guy for years, that going to get into something, in the old days, file level recovery was not easy to do, and generally you had to pull the whole tape, you had to read the whole darn thing just to get at something. So accessibility is really important. Talk a little bit about how that adds to the service level, because most of the time people are not asking for you to recover from a meteor strike. You're recovering from an event much less catastrophic and much more commonplace. Yeah,
sure. I mean, the operational, task most frequent is, of course, file recovery. But in terms of the service we provide, how many times have we had to, that tape, it's not reading, doesn't work, we had to go back one, right? That type of stuff drives me crazy. So that's where, we as Veeam and Drobo, for that matter, really like the concept of disk-based backups, right? It has a lot quicker read and write time. It's a little bit more online. A lot of good features around that. But, the complexity of deployment, managing, and risk of losing, that type of stuff, those other problems kind of go away. And when it comes to the particular thing of file recovery, we've got a new feature that makes it pretty easy. You don't even need to know the name of the file, where it came from. It can't really get much easier than that nowadays.
I think there's a perception that disk-based backup is expensive because disks are expensive, and the classic viewpoint on it is that tape can provide you a lower cost. That's not necessarily true these days, and the benefits you get from going to a disk-based backup in terms of just the ability to restore very quickly and making sure it's always online. I think that's a huge thing. I know we at Drobo are constantly scrubbing the data in the background to make sure that it's never marginalized and you always have access to it. That's not the case of a tape sitting on a shelf degrading over time, but talk about testing your virtual machines. This has to be something that's a requirement as people look to put a solution together, Rick, because you need to know that you're going to be able to recover it and not just superficially recover it, but actually get the application back up. Talk about why that's important.
Yeah, and this is the case where, tape technologies just really don't have a seat at the table, okay? There's things we can do in a virtual world with disk-based backups that just can't be done any other way. So the testing topic, for example, Veeam can virtualize the backup repository, which is where our backups go, the big file, if you will. We actually can virtualize that as a data store and present that back to VMware in terms of a proprietary NFS data store that we call the vPower NFS data store. And that's a great environment, okay? It could be recovery, it could be security tests, it could be testing Windows updates, it could be I've got this fancy script that I really don't want to run it in production. You name it, it's a great environment, and it's fully isolated, so there's no contention with production. But, this is just an example of where, like I said, tape doesn't have a seat at the table.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about how to leverage virtual machine backup in your solution. People have concerns naturally. Cost has got to be the number one, and as it expands, people are a little bit worried about that. Technologies like deduplication sure help make the storage more efficient, and choosing a tier of storage like a Drobo for your disk-based backup can give you great economics in that area. Complexity, I think a lot of folks, they don't like backups. Heck, do you even like backups? I think you do. I don't, but I love them with Veeam because you do make it really, really simple. And you talked a little bit about that trust factor, how to get you to trust more stuff. Let's walk through how we can address some of these concerns in driving a solution with the product. One would be instant VM recovery. That's the easiest and fastest way to do it. Talk about how Veeam is unique here, because it really is just as simple as one click to recover, and that's super impressive when you see the demo.
Yeah, this is really one of those categories of features that really kind of dispel the myths. We talked earlier about an agentless backup, right, which is great. Simplifies my management space, right? I don't have to worry about stuff inside the guest OS, because really when everyone's gone virtual, I guarantee you the number of VMs or Windows instances or Linux instances, that's all gone up, right? And staff usually hasn't. So, we have to reduce our management burden. But then the knee-jerk reaction with something like a agentless backup is that you lose granular recovery, you lose application management techniques or additional features, and that's not the case. Instant VM recovery is one example. So basically, like I mentioned earlier, we virtualize the backup repository. We can, as a data store, we can look in there, find that VM as an explicit recovery point, and as a screenshot says here, boot it right up. Now, this example was a small VM, 23 seconds. I love the demo that I do at the shows. I take a 1 terabyte SQL server. I boot it up in about a minute and a half. Best show in Vegas is what I was saying last week, Mario.
Yep. Another thing that folks may not think about when they're doing that kind of recovery is that how do your IP addresses change, especially if you're involving an off-site location or you're putting it to another network. And that another part of making it easy is having some of those capabilities built in. In a nutshell, what do people need to know about IP addresses and how they relate to recovery?
Well, yeah, depending on how you recover, right? And there's a million ways to do different types of recovery. But depending on what broke, you could find your VM running in a new place, okay? Or a replicated VM, has to be powered up on a different site. Veeam's got some help for you there, specifically around network addresses changes, and secondly around migration, meaning, okay, I've booted up off of this vPower data store, which is like the flat tire analogy, right? It's the spare tire that can get you back and running very quickly, but you really don't want to stay there forever, right? So now we have a Veeam quick migration technology, which we'll talk about in a bit, that can kind of put you back into a production environment.
Yep. I know that file level recovery is an important thing, and without agents, and a lot of people, they have trouble suspending disbelief here, but it is true based on the integration that Veeam has done, you're able to do a lot of support for item level recovery, and you have some wizards to make it even easier to get a lot of that stuff back. Rick, talk a little bit about how Veeam does that.
Well, this is really the gap between what, a traditional agentless backup, and I mean a true agentless backup, how it backs up to then how it recovers, because, the default reaction is, well, then you can't do granular restores. Not the case here with vPower, and one of those features is UWARE, Universal Application Item Recovery is what that stands for. And we have three wizards: SQL Server, Exchange, Active Directory, probably the most common scenarios, right? Beyond that, people might engage their app owner or leverage other techniques to do restores. But basically what we do is we power these VMs up in an isolated environment, and the UWARE wizard will broker the granular restore, just an email, just a SQL Server database, just a user, just a GPO, whatever. We can pull it back in that way.
Yeah, and this instant file level recovery, I like that acronym, IFLR. Just one click. That is kind of a cool thing associated there. And naturally, having an easy and efficient backup appliance solution that centralizes all your backup is really an important part of this architecture, as we showed there generally. Having a disk-based backup archive that is of sufficient size and has some features like thin provisioning to allow you to provision it once up front and grow over time and not worry a lot about your capacity planning. That's an important part of setting up your service levels to be able to do this sort of thing versus having this stuff spread around. So that's something that's cool to look at. In terms of other technologies that folks can and should consider, Rick, from a network mapping perspective, we talked a little bit about that. Let's dive a little bit deeper, though, into quick migration, because I think that more often than actually doing a recovery from a catastrophic failure, you're going to find that people have the need to migrate. This is probably a lot more commonplace. If you pick the right backup tools, you can actually use those to orchestrate and make the outage very small to potentially non-existent, depending on how you go ahead and do that. So talk a little about how Veeam can be used in that capacity.
Yeah, so quick migration is a new feature that came out with version 6 of Veeam Backup and Replication. And, the way we've positioned it is that it really kind of closes the gap of what our instant VM recovery technology had provided previously with V5. And what I mean by that is, okay, great, I've booted up my VM, I'm running it off of the backup file, no problems there, but now, I don't really want to leave it there. Let's, say I've fixed my production issue. How do I get it back? And let's gravitate to that small business, right? We might not have VMware Storage vMotion licensed on our cluster, right? So what if I'm an Essentials Plus or a vSphere Standard environment? So the situation gets a little bit more complicated in that environment. So what quick migration has done is allowed us to effectively replicate the VM in the background while it's running off of the instant VM recovery data store. And then we pause it, and this is, going through a sequence of APIs that works at vSphere Essentials and higher. We pause the VM and then move the memory, the swap file, over to the target data store and power it back up, and you're back up and running. And this can actually even occur across different hosts. So from a usability standpoint, VMware Storage vMotion and VMware's traditional vMotion are, effectively zero downtime. This is a momentary downtime, right? How long does it take to move that memory swap file, that type of thing. So that's really what's involved in this configuration, but really closes the gap for our instant VM recovery.
Well, going with that spare tire analogy, you can change to your spare tire with one click. So you get a flat tire, boom, you got your spare tire on there, you're back and rolling. When it comes time to get back to your full-size tire, you can't do it while you're going down the freeway at 60 miles an hour, but you're saying in this case it's almost like a NASCAR pit crew stop where you pull in and very quickly you're back in business and back and running. So net effect, without making it overly complicated, you have these abilities to recover quickly and move things around to the place it needs to be in the event that you need to do it. And it's something that it's at your disposal, even if it's not a failure scenario, but something that you want to use to move some stuff around. We get a lot of questions here, Rick, about how do I migrate stuff between storage devices? Because we have a lot of storage here. How do I do that stuff without taking a huge outage? That's why I wanted you to go into that detail, so I appreciate that.
And it's one of those things.
Yeah, go ahead.
One more thing that I guess to really kind of make it hit home for everyone is that it's one of those things that you can do a lot more with the VM when it's running than when it's not.
Mm-hmm.
That's
right.
the takeaway.
Okay. Well, one thing we skipped over, and I want to cover it real quick, is the idea of sure backup. So if you can't verify the recoverability of your backup, you're probably wondering and very superstitious about whether you're going to be able to get it done when the time calls. And so something that I know that makes me sleep better at night, because we back up all of our lab environment here using Veeam, is that we make sure that we run a sure backup job so that we know that we can recover it. And talk a little bit about how that works, because it's more than just superficial. You're going deeper to make sure it's really recoverable. Yeah,
sure backup is really kind of an emulated restore, okay? But marketing would never like a word like that. But an emulated restore effectively ensures that this backup is recoverable, okay? So, and what I mean by that is, okay, I don't just power on the VM. No, I want to power it on, make sure VMware Tools is okay, make sure I get my VM heartbeat, make sure the networking is correct, make sure SQL or whatever application I have is running, and I can even go so far as to drop in some scripts that would run against this VM and say, yep, everything's good. And the reason that this comes up is any backup solution has this, especially in the traditional realm, has this term, a verification pass, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a false sense of security. All that really tells you is I've backed up what's there, meaning it could be broken. Take, a wild mouse click in the Windows registry. You don't know that that's a problem until you reboot if you've accidentally deleted a big chunk of it, for example. Right. And then exasperate that a bit. Let's say you only keep 3 months of backups, and that system has been on for 3 months in 1 day. So you've exhausted your retention. There you go. That's the problem. So this is one of the things that this type of technology solves. Fantastic. Well, I know I personally rely on it, and having Drobo as your back-end disk-based storage, unlike tape, it's alive and constantly monitored. And Drobo, through its virtualization, will scrub routinely all of the storage. And if we find a bad block, hey, we're going to mark it that way and move the data around to make sure you have optimal protection. So it helps you avoid soft sector errors, and especially the stuff that you rarely access. Because if you're doing things right, most of the stuff that you are backing up, you're not going to be accessing on a routine basis. And with the type of storage you can put together with Drobo, you can get a quite large online archive for your storage to protect all those virtual machines. And with that, it makes for a great overall solution. Let's talk about putting it together, Rick. Specifically, Veeam Backup and Replication version 6 is the latest version. And from a Drobo perspective, depending on how you go about doing it, you can run this as a virtual machine, you can run it as a physical machine. I always like to start, when it comes to an architecture, starting at the kind of the highest level or the most parts that you'll need, and then you can decide based on your size whether or not you can run it as a virtual machine versus a physical machine. In your experience, Rick, do people repurpose old physical machines to be the Veeam backup server, or are they just having it run as a VM on one of their existing vSphere servers or a Hyper-V server? The practice today, I think what would be most common is to have the Veeam management server, which is the console you use, have that as a virtual machine. And then we have this notion of a proxy, which is a data mover, right, which would take the data from over the green arrow to Drobo. That type of system, if you have a lot to move, then yeah, an old system might be great as a physical server especially. You can leverage a storage area network in the iSCSI realm to move that off of the traditional LAN if you want. Yep. A lot of small businesses, though, can get away with a VM and moving it all that way. It's an incredible amount of CPU. That's the one thing you kind of have to scale around. So our deduplication, for example, that really is a CPU resource to implement that. Mm-hmm. But the sizing of how big's your backup going to be? I get that question all the time, and there's this wide range of 1-to-1 or less. Okay, so we don't really know how big your backup is going to be, because we don't know how it's going to compress, how it's going to dedupe, what's your change rate, all those different factors. So plug for Drobo here, the scale out technique of beyond RAID's available capacity mechanism really helps out people kind of planning their backup target.
Well, planning's tough to do, and almost always you're never 100% correct. Actually, the only thing you're certain of is you're not going to be 100% correct in all the forecasting. So great information there. In terms of the storage that you'd want to purchase, Drobo recommends our Drobo model B800i. It provides the best price capacity. It has a single power supply, so it's not the type of thing you'd want to run your production off of long term if you're a larger organization. We do have a dual power supply product that's also affordable at less than $1,000 a terabyte that you can use, which has a modular architecture. But for a lot of folks that are looking at the way they might be backing this stuff up to tape or other devices, they're backing up to single power supply systems, and you can save a little bit of money, actually quite a bit, if you go for that particular architecture. Now, your results of your backup are only as good as the drives that you put into it. Drobo has a unique value proposition of allowing you to select which drives that you want to use in your system. We do recommend 7200 RPM drives as a minimum, really because they're going to give you a much better level of service, and the instant recovery that we talked about before that Rick went into, the ability to get that spare tire thing up and running very quickly, it assumes that you're going to run some of that stuff off the Drobo. So going with higher quality drives would be a little bit more of an investment, but gives a lot more back to you in terms of the service level. We talk to folks all the time, and they want to buy the least expensive drives off the internet. While you can do it, just not recommended. So we'd encourage you to ask questions of us, and we do have every day at drobo.com/live demos from experts at Drobo showing you exactly how the products work and giving you performance benchmarking information on what you could expect when using a Drobo in a solution like this. So let's go ahead and bring it to a close here, Rick, and ask about some of the top questions. The backup solution. What's too much complexity? I think we covered that quite a bit. We also kind of talked about the backup storage. Do you have it at the right price and performance? But in terms of using the right tools for your backup jobs, a lot of people they have that question. How do you answer that in a nutshell?
Well, basically, I look, where's my growth area? My growth area and the practices that I find myself in, those areas are virtualization, VMware and Hyper-V virtualization. So Veeam backup and replication was built specifically and only for virtual machines, right? So for the amount of complexity and the cost value, the features you get for that are pretty rich.
Right. Now, a question that we have from online, how do you handle systems that utilize whole disk encryption? So the source that you're backing up from Veeam is using whole disk encryption. Are there any concerns or things that need to be considered there?
Yeah, sure. In terms of a VM that does have HDE or WDE whole disk encryption, it can be backed up, right? A VM, the source VM can be backed up, no problem. I just wouldn't count much dedupe and compression value from that.
Right, and it would be handled the same way in the Veeam software. You'd go to restore that, and you'd have to restore that in a very specific way, or is that pretty much automated through the Veeam process?
No, I mean, we're coming in underneath the OS, right? We're coming in at the VMware and Hyper-V level, so we could instant VM recover it all. The quick migration or storage vMotion back may take longer just because of the repository impact. I mean, it's going to be a bigger data profile. That's really what it would come down to.
Great. A question about some application-specific stuff, Rick. In terms of Exchange 2010 database availability groups, or DAGs, and all the IPs are in Active Directory, how does the network mapping work there when you're doing a recovery? Because some of these applications have multiple components. How does that play together with Veeam?
So basically what we'd want to do in the Exchange environment, and I like the SQL realm as well because it really is the same situation. I put in, on my backup jobs, I'll put in a domain controller, right? Because SQL, outside of those IP addresses, will also need AD to validate its running authority. So basically when I do the UARE or Sure Backup or the virtual lab tasks, I would include that domain controller. So really everything that Exchange, SQL, or SharePoint, you name it, whatever they need is available in that vPower lab. And then our wizard, in the case of SQL, Exchange, Active Directory, that will broker that connectivity between those realms. Masquerade IP is the technique, but basically those IP addresses that are in production are in use in the virtual lab, right? So Exchange doesn't know any different.
In terms of long-term archiving, I think the solution we talked about today covers pretty clearly the concept of being able to recover very quickly from your recent backups. We have a question here online, though, about longer term, 2 to 3 years. For instance, they have a file server out there that's a virtual machine. They want to be able to get that back points in time over 2 to 3 years. This is something that Veeam can do, right? It's just a matter of forecasting the amount of storage that you need, and depending on how big it is, a 16 terabyte Drobo for about $6,000 can give you a lot of retention out there. So there's no concerns from an archiving perspective, the way you set Veeam up?
No, the only thing I would recommend is, when we have those types of recovery requirements and retention requirements, I'd kind of go into the multiple job realm, specifically maybe a monthly job or an annual job. And that one doesn't run often, but there's a separate job for that day-to-day stuff, right? The once a week, this job, or once a day, or multiple times a day, this job runs, and that's my day-to-day restore, right? Because the recovery requirements from yesterday are different than the recovery requirements from, say, last year, year before. So I'd go the multiple job realm.
Right, and one of the ways to use the Drobo to your advantage there, a Drobo iSCSI SAN device will give you the ability to create up to 255 virtual volumes, so you can have lots of different jobs, and to keep them organized yourself, put them on different volumes all together, and you can see how those would independently scale and flex. For a lot of folks, their regular retention tends to be more of a circular buffer. It doesn't grow a whole lot, at least doesn't grow as dramatically as the cumulative effect of doing a lot of long-term archiving. So we have a lot of customers, Drobo, creating different volumes for that, or you could even buy different Drobos, one with lower cost drives, a Drobo B1200i as your primary backup, and your archiving being a lower cost product there. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think overall, architecturally, what we have with this solution is the ability to get all of the good stuff, all that good service level in an affordable package. So we know that backup's a challenge, especially if you're new to a virtualized environment. And it doesn't have to be complicated or costly, because there are technologies that exist that offer a lot of great innovations, and that's why I'm glad to have you as an expert on today's program, Rick, because Veeam does a fantastic job here. And the combination of Drobo and Veeam for a disk-based backup solution for SMB VM backup is really a good thing. So with that, thanks everyone for your questions. If you want to get more information, you can go to drobo.com/Veeam, our landing page, which has a detailed how-to guide, as well as some other assets there that will help you out. And as of the time of this recording, on March 13th, 2012, we have a special offer. If you were to buy 2 Drobos, that basic architecture that we talked about, you can get some free Veeam software. And I know, Rick, working with all the guys here in the U.S., lots of customers are asking about this, which is great because people want to be able to back up their stuff and get this type of recovery. So we're happy about that. Before we close up, do you want to plug any of the stuff that's going on the Veeam podcast?
Oh, well, thank you. No, Veeam podcast, check it out, veeam.com/podcast. Or you can latch on to me on Twitter at Rick Vanover. Basically, it's thought leadership, virtualization, and storage talk. That's what it is. It's not a Veeam commercial. Nobody wants that. I'd hope to see you on sometime.
Well, that's why I let you plug it, because like the Drobo Broadcast Network, we talk about some practical stuff, but it's not a infomercial, which is not that great. It's about being really practical. So, again, hey, thanks a lot, Rick. I really appreciate you being on today's broadcast.
Not a problem, Mario. It's great to be back.
All right, folks, tune in next time as we take on other topics of great interest to small and medium business IT folks. We appreciate your participation, and check out that special offer that we have going on free Veeam software. You can download a free trial for yourself as well. So even if you don't qualify for the free software itself, you can download it for a trial period and check it out, or go and see an online demo of that shortly. Again, Mario Blandini here at Drobo. You can interact with us live at drobo.com/live, where we do these live demonstrations. And we look forward to seeing you there or the next time on the Drobo Broadcast Network. Thanks again, everybody.